Millionaire returns to his black ex-wife's house after 10 years, and what he sees leaves him in shock. Richard's black BMW slowly pulled up in front of what should have been a dilapidated house in a forgotten neighborhood of Detroit. Instead, his eyes fell upon a completely transformed property, immaculate garden, fresh paint, and 3 luxury cars in the garage. But what really made his heart race was the gold plaque next to the door, Camila Johnson Law Firm Civil Rights Specialist. 10 years. It had been exactly a decade since Richard had left this same street, leaving behind a young, newly graduated lawyer who was 8 months pregnant. At the time, his mother's words echoed in his mind, "You can't ruin your future for a girl like her. Think of your reputation, the family business." Camila was only 26 when she woke up alone on that cold November morning, finding only a cold note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Her dreams of a happy family and a thriving law firm crumbled along with her 2-year marriage. Now, at 36, Richard was returning as CEO of one of the largest corporations in the country, expecting to find the same vulnerable woman he had left behind. His latest information about Camila came from superficial conversations with mutual acquaintances. Poor thing, she still lives in the same old house, raising her son alone, barely able to pay the bills. The door opened before he even rang the bell. Camila appeared in the doorway, and Richard almost didn't recognize her. Where once there had been a broken, abandoned woman, now stood a confident, impeccably dressed lawyer with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard." Her voice was calm, controlled, unlike the frightened young woman of a decade ago. Punctual as always. "Come in." He hesitated. Something was completely wrong with this scenario. During the 3-hour drive from Chicago, he had mentally rehearsed his speech, how he had matured, how he realized his mistakes, how he was willing to help financially his ex-wife. Now, faced with this renewed version of Camila, his prepared words seemed ridiculously inappropriate. "You're different," he murmured, following her into the house. "People change, Richard. Especially when they're forced to." Her tone maintained a cold politeness that made the room's temperature seem to drop a few degrees. The house had been completely renovated. Elegant furniture, artwork on the walls, and an atmosphere that exuded professional success. Richard felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite identify, perhaps discomfort, perhaps even a little fear. "Where is?" he began to ask about the son he had never met, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. A young boy of about 10 appeared, clearly his son, but carrying a confidence and poise that immediately impressed Richard. "Mom, Attorney Thompson is on the phone. He said the papers are ready." Camila nodded. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes, Daniel." Richard watched the interaction, realizing that something much bigger was going on here. All these years, he had imagined Camila struggling to survive, perhaps waiting for his return. The reality before him was completely different, and infinitely more disturbing. "Sit down," Camila said, gesturing to the leather sofa. "I imagine you want to know why I agreed to see you after all these years." She positioned herself strategically across the room, as if conducting a court hearing. There was something calculated in every movement, every word, every glance. Richard began to realize that perhaps he was not the one in control of this situation. If you're enjoying finding out how this story of abandonment and reunion will unfold, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Camila has planned for this moment goes far beyond what anyone could imagine. Richard settled into the sofa, still trying to process the radical transformation of the woman in front of him. During the trip from Chicago, he had practiced his rehearsed apologies, imagining Camila grateful for his return, perhaps even willing to forgive his youthful mistakes in exchange for financial security for her and the boy. "You must be wondering why I agreed to see you," Camila said, sitting strategically in the armchair opposite him, maintaining physical and emotional distance. "After all, it's been 10 years without a single phone call, a single email, a single explanation. I was going through a difficult time back then," Richard began with a speech he had prepared. "The pressure from my family, my business. I was young and..." "Young." Camila interrupted with a cold smile. "Richard, you were 28 when you abandoned me 8 months pregnant. Old enough to run a corporation, but not old enough to take on the responsibilities of fatherhood." Her tone was as sharp as a scalpel. Richard suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if he were being interrogated in court. "Look, I know I made mistakes, but I came here to make amends. I can help financially, pay for the boy's education, maybe even..." "Daniel," Camila corrected coldly. His name is Daniel. Your son has a name, Richard. He also has a medical history, food preferences, school grades, nightmares that lasted 2 years because he couldn't understand why he didn't have a father like the other children. Each word was calculated to pierce the armor of superiority that Richard had built up over the years. He shifted position, clearly uncomfortable. I understand that you're hurt, but... Hurt. Camila stood up, walking over to a bookcase filled with diplomas and certificates. Richard, do you think I spent 10 years crying over you? Waiting for your return like a princess in a tower. She picked up a frame and showed it to him. It was a photo of her receiving an award, surrounded by other lawyers. Michigan State Lawyer of the Year. Civil Rights Specialist. 3 cases brought before the Supreme Court, all victorious. Richard studied the image, realizing that Camila had not only survived without him, she had thrived spectacularly. The realization was like a slap in the face to his inflated ego. That's impressive, he murmured, genuinely surprised. You look shocked, Camila observed, putting the frame back in place. Let me guess, all these years, you imagined I was here pining, waiting for the great Richard to come back and rescue the poor black girl he left behind? The explicit racial accusation made Richard recoil. It has nothing to do with that. You know it was never about. What? Color, Camila laughed humorlessly. Funny how your family never had a problem with me being your special friend in college, but when we started talking seriously about marriage, suddenly I became unsuitable for Castillo social circles. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His mother's cruel words echoed in his mind. You can't introduce this girl to investors. Think of what the shareholders will say. An unplanned pregnancy, a lower-class wife, it would ruin your credibility. My mother may have had some reservations, he admitted hesitantly. Reservations. Camila walked up to him, her eyes shining with an intensity that made Richard instinctively recoil. Your mother called me the day after you left. Do you want to know what she said? Richard paled. He had never known about that conversation. She said, and I quote, "My daughter, you are a smart girl. Surely you understand that Richard needs to marry someone suitable. Someone who will contribute to his social advancement, not hinder it." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt as if he were sinking into quicksand, each attempt to defend himself only burying him deeper. I didn't know about that call, he whispered. Of course not. Because you had already made your choice. Camila returned to her armchair, once again assuming the posture of someone who was completely in control of the situation. You know what was most interesting? 2 days after that call, I received a job offer from a law firm in Detroit. The starting salary was 3 times higher than any offer I had received. Richard frowned, not immediately understanding. The firm belonged to one of your family's main competitors, Camila continued with an enigmatic smile. Apparently, they were very interested in hiring a promising young lawyer who understood intimately how the business elite operated. The implication hit Richard like a bolt of lightning. You worked against us? I worked for justice, Camila corrected. And I discovered I had a natural talent for it. Especially in cases involving corporations that abuse their power against vulnerable people. Richard ran his hand through his hair, finally realizing that he had completely underestimated the woman in front of him. For a decade, he had imagined Camila as a victim of circumstance, when in fact she had transformed herself into a formidable force. Why did you agree to see me today? He asked, his voice betraying his growing nervousness. Camila smiled, but there was something predatory about that smile. Because, dear Richard, the time has come for you to find out what really happens when someone underestimates an intelligent black woman who has had 10 years to plan an appropriate response. Before Richard could fully process that veiled threat, Daniel came running down the stairs. Mom, Mr. Thompson said that all the documents have been filed with the court and that the press has already been notified. He wants to confirm that we are going ahead with the press conference tomorrow at 2 p.m. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Documents? Court? Press? Yes, confirm it, my love, Camila replied calmly. And call Thompson and Associates. Tell them that Mr. Richard Castillo arrived right on time. The boy nodded and went back upstairs, leaving Richard alone with the growing realization that he had deliberately walked into a carefully laid trap. What are you talking about? His voice came out higher pitched than he intended. Camila stood up and walked to the window, watching his car parked on the street. You drove 3 hours to get here, didn't you? You must be tired. How about some coffee while we wait? Wait for what? Come on, Richard, she turned around, and for the first time since he had arrived, her smile seemed genuinely cheerful. You didn't really think your visit today was a coincidence, did you? His blood ran cold. Throughout the conversation, he had assumed he was in control of the situation, that he had chosen the right moment to return. Now he realized that every move had been anticipated, every word carefully orchestrated. I came because I wanted to, he stammered. I'm sure that's exactly the impression you got, Camila agreed ironically. After all, you were the one who decided to check my address, weren't you? You were the one who chose to come today, specifically today. Richard tried to remember the details that had led him there. The chance encounter with a former colleague, the casual mention that Camila still lived in the same place, the sudden need to resolve unfinished business that he had felt. Every new revelation you make only confirms something I realized a long time ago, Camila continued, now clearly enjoying his growing discomfort. Men like you systematically underestimate women like me. And that arrogance always ends up being your own downfall. For a moment, when Richard realized he had been manipulated into being there at that exact moment, everyone in the room thought they had witnessed the awakening of his awareness of the gravity of the situation, but anyone who truly knows the power of a strategic mind knows that Camila's best was yet to come. What are we waiting for? Richard repeated the question, but Camila had already left the room, leaving him alone with his increasingly troubled thoughts. He got up and walked around the house, trying to process the details he had initially ignored. The photographs on the walls were not just decoration, they were trophies of war. Camila alongside families who had won lawsuits against large corporations. Camila receiving awards for cases that changed legal precedents. Camila at dinners with influential political figures. One photo in particular made his blood run cold. It was Camila shaking hands with the state governor, and the sign on the table read, Corporate Anti-Corruption Task Force Cases of Public Interest. Interesting, isn't it? Daniel's voice made him turn around. The boy had quietly descended the stairs, watching Richard study the photographs. Mom always says that walls tell better stories than words. Your mother is impressive, Richard admitted, genuinely shaken. She's always been like that, Daniel replied with obvious pride. Even when I was little, she would stay up late studying cases, taking notes. She said she was building something special. Before Richard could respond, the doorbell rang. Daniel rushed to open it, and Richard heard familiar voices in the entryway. Voices that made him instinctively recoil. Camila dear, we're right on time, said an authoritative male voice. Perfect, Marcus. The guest of honor is already here. Richard felt his legs go weak when he recognized the voice of Marcus Thompson, one of the most renowned civil rights attorneys in the country. If Thompson was involved, this was much bigger than a simple conversation between ex-spouses. 3 people entered the room. In addition to Thompson, there was an elegant woman whom Richard vaguely recognized from the news, a prosecutor known for prosecuting corrupt businessmen, and a younger man carrying recording equipment. Richard Castillo, Thompson extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We finally meet in person. I don't understand, Richard stammered, shaking his hand mechanically. Of course you do, the prosecutor interjected. I'm Patricia Wells, and I'm sure you remember me. After all, you tried to bribe me just 6 months ago. Richard's world began to collapse. He vaguely recalled a dinner in Washington, an informal conversation about interpretive flexibility in environmental regulations, a discreet offer to finance campaigns for candidates aligned with economic development. That was just small talk, he stammered. Recorded, Wells smiled, pulling a small device from her pocket. Totally legal, since you were in a public space and talking about matters that affect the collective interest. Camila returned to the room carrying a thick folder. Richard, I would like to officially introduce my team. 2 years ago, when we learned that you were planning to expand your operations to Michigan, we began to carefully document your business practices. What practices? Richard tried to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed his growing desperation. Thompson opened his own briefcase. Bribery of public officials. Violation of environmental laws. Systematic discrimination in hiring practices. Tax avoidance through tax havens. Shall I go on? Richard looked around the room, finally realizing he was completely surrounded. This is a conspiracy. No, Camila corrected calmly. This is justice. For 10 years, you built your empire by trampling on people like me. People you considered disposable. People you thought would never have the power to retaliate. The young man with the recording equipment turned on a discreet camera. Mr. Castillo, I'm James Rodriguez from the Detroit Tribune. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the allegations that will be formalized today. I won't answer anything without my lawyer, Richard managed to articulate. Smart, Wells agreed. You'll need several, actually. We have 3 different jurisdictions interested in your business. Federal, state, and municipal. Camila sat back down in her chair, now clearly commanding the situation as if it were a courtroom. Remember when you left me, Richard? You said I wasn't suited to your corporate world. That I didn't have the necessary sophistication. Richard felt as if he were sinking into quicksand. Every attempt to defend himself only buried him deeper. All these years, Camila continued, you assumed I had disappeared from your radar. That I was here languishing, raising our son in obscurity. But do you know what really happened? She picked up a tablet and showed him a series of newspaper articles. Civil rights expert defeats agribusiness giant. Lawyer obtains largest environmental damages award in state history. Business elite family loses racial discrimination case. Richard read the headlines with growing horror. In all of them, the defeated corporations were clients, partners, or subsidiaries of his company. Every victory against people like you brought me more credibility, more connections, more power, Camila explained with obvious satisfaction. And the most ironic thing? You indirectly financed my professional growth. How so? Richard asked, though he feared the answer. Thompson smiled mischievously. Every lawsuit your ex-wife won against your companies generated millions in damages. 15% in attorney's fees multiplied by dozens of cases. Well, you can do the math. The irony was devastating. Richard had inadvertently financed the rise of the woman who was now orchestrating his downfall. But why today? He asked desperately. Why now? Camila glanced at her watch. Because today at 2:30 p.m. your company is announcing its merger with Whitman Industries. An $8 billion merger that depends entirely on your unblemished reputation as CEO. Richard felt all the color drain from his face. The merger was his life's work, the deal that would cement his status as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. At 2:25 p.m., Camila continued impassively, Prosecutor Wells will formally announce the federal charges against you. At 2:26 p.m., Thompson will file a civil suit for moral and material damages on behalf of dozens of discriminated employees. At 2:27 p.m., the Detroit Tribune will publish an exclusive report with compromising recordings. And at 2:30 p.m., Wells concluded with obvious satisfaction, when your company tries to announce the merger, it will discover that there is no longer a company to merge. Richard slumped in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of the orchestration. Every move had been calculated with surgical precision. Every timing, every detail, every revelation, all designed for maximum destructive impact. 10 years, he muttered. You've been planning this for 10 years. No, Camila corrected, standing up and walking to the window where she could see his luxury car. I planned it for 10 years. They joined me in the last 2 years when they realized you had committed federal crimes. Daniel came down the stairs again, now carrying a school backpack. Mom, can I go to Tommy's house? I want to watch the news there. Of course, my love. Call me when you get there. The boy kissed Camila on the cheek and left, completely ignoring Richard as if he were part of the furniture. He doesn't know who I am, Richard observed in a broken voice. He knows exactly who you are, Camila replied coldly. The man who abandoned his family and is now being prosecuted for federal crimes. Exactly the person he was raised not to become. For a moment, when Richard realized that he had spent a decade building an empire based on exploitation, while his ex-wife built a legal arsenal to destroy him, everyone in the room thought they had witnessed the awakening of his conscience about justice. But anyone who truly knows the power of a strategic mind fueled by 10 years of humiliation knows that Camila's final execution still held surprises that would turn that moment of revelation into something far more devastating than anyone could have predicted. At 2:24 p.m., Richard's cell phone began to vibrate incessantly. Calls from the company, lawyers, investors. He ignored them all, still trying to process the magnitude of what was about to happen. 1 minute, Wells announced, consulting his watch with military precision. Richard jumped up from his chair. I have to go. I need to cancel the press conference, postpone the merger. Sit down, Thompson ordered with an authority that made Richard obey instinctively. You're not going anywhere. At 2:25 p.m. sharp, Wells called his assistant. You can announce it, he said simply. Within seconds, Richard's phone exploded with notifications. His secretary, desperate, Mr. Castillo, the federal prosecutor has just announced criminal charges against you. Whitman's investors are canceling everything. How long, James? Camila asked the journalist. 30 seconds to online publication, he replied, typing furiously on his laptop. Richard tried to stand up again, but his legs wouldn't respond. Panic had completely taken over. You can't do this. I have a family, employees, thousands of people depend on me. Like my family depended on you 10 years ago? Camila interrupted in an icy voice. Like the black employees you systematically fired depended on corporate justice? Thompson opened his tablet, showing real-time notifications. Civil lawsuit filed. 43 employees represented, documenting systematic racial discrimination between 2018 and 2024. No, Richard shook his head desperately. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, Wells smiled. And we have recordings of your conversations at the country club explaining your strategic hiring policies to maintain the cultural quality of the company. James' tablet showed the first headline, Multi-billionaire Imperio CEO accused of racial discrimination and bribery. Within minutes, the news was spreading across all platforms. Richard picked up his phone with trembling hands, trying to call his personal lawyer. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried the CFO, same thing. His own board of directors was ignoring his calls. $50 million, Thompson said casually, reading updates on the stock market. That's how much your company has lost in value in the last 3 minutes. The home phone rang. Camila answered with studied calm. Yes, he's here. No, he won't be giving any interviews today. I understand. Thank you. CNN wants an official statement, she informed Richard with obvious satisfaction. Apparently, the hashtag Richard Castillo racist is already trending on Twitter. Richard checked his social media and felt his world completely collapse. Screenshots of his internal emails were being shared thousands of times. Conversations where he referred to black employees as problematic and unsuitable for growth. Messages where he instructed HR to find creative reasons to fire them. How did you get access to my private emails? He asked, his voice breaking. Whistleblower report, Wells explained. Your own executive assistant, Janet Morrison, recorded your discriminatory instructions for 2 years. She approached us 6 months ago. The name hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. Janet, who had worked with him for a decade, who knew all his corporate secrets, whom he had always treated like invisible furniture. Janet is, he began. Black, Camila finished. And tired of being called the cleaning lady when she accompanied you to meetings, despite having an MBA in finance. James' tablet showed real-time updates, company shares in free fall, investors pulling out, employees posting on social media about experiences of discrimination. At 2:30 p.m., just as he was about to announce the biggest merger of his career, Richard watched his company disintegrate live on television. The reporter commented, in a dramatic turn of events, the $8 billion merger has been canceled after revelations of systematic discriminatory practices. 200 million, Thompson updated. Your personal loss so far. Richard buried his face in his hands. Why did you do this? Camila stood up and walked over to him. For the first time since she had arrived, her expression softened slightly. Because for 10 years, you built an empire by trampling on people like me. Because you believed that black women existed only to be discarded when they became inconvenient. Because you never imagined we could become powerful enough to retaliate. She bent down to be at eye level with him. And mainly because you set a dangerous precedent, Richard. How many other women like me have been abandoned by men like you? How many other employees have been discriminated against by arrogant executives? The phone rang again. This time it was Richard's mother, hysterical. "What have you done? They're saying on television that you're a criminal." While Richard tried to explain the inexplicable to his collapsing family, Camila watched with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had executed the perfect plan. Thompson closed his tablet. "Justice is served," he murmured in English. "No," Camila corrected, still watching Richard's devastation. "Justice is when the consequences finally catch up with those who thought they were above them." For a moment, when Richard looked up with eyes red from crying and saw Camila standing there with unshakable dignity, everyone in the room witnessed the belated awakening of a conscience that had spent a lifetime asleep. But what none of them imagined was that the most powerful lesson of this story was yet to be revealed, a lesson that would transform not only Richard's life, but completely redefine what true power means in a society that was finally learning to exact the price of injustice. 6 months later, Richard was sitting in a rented one-bedroom apartment, watching the Women Who Make a Difference award ceremony on television. Camila took the stage wearing an elegant blue dress, receiving thunderous applause. Attorney Camila Johnson not only revolutionized the fight for civil rights, but demonstrated that true justice requires patience, strategy, and courage, announced the presenter. Daniel, now studying at an elite private school financed by his mother's legal fees, watched proudly from the audience. At 10 years old, he had learned that real strength comes not from money or connections, but from integrity and determination. Richard's company had declared complete bankruptcy. The federal lawsuits resulted in $50 million in fines and 2 years of house arrest. More devastating than any court penalty was the utter loneliness. Friends, family, and colleagues abandoned him when they realized that association with his name was toxic to any reputation. Janet Morrison, his former assistant, now ran her own business consulting firm, specializing in detecting discriminatory corporate practices. Her first clients were Richard's competitors, eager to prove that they operated differently. Camila had turned her personal victory into a national movement. Her firm, now with 15 lawyers, became a benchmark in racial discrimination cases. The renovated house became a symbol that black women can not only survive abandonment, but build empires on the ashes of betrayal. "Revenge is a dish best served with strategy," she had said in a recent interview, paraphrasing the famous quote. "It's not about destroying those who have hurt you, but about building something so great that it renders any damage they tried to cause irrelevant." Richard watched it all on TV, finally understanding the magnitude of his arrogance. He had underestimated not only Camila, but an entire generation of black women who turned injustice into fuel for greatness. The phone rang. It was his mother, calling for the first time in months. "Son, I saw her interview. You have every reason to be proud of the woman she has become, even if you have lost the right to be by her side." Richard hung up and looked at an old photo, him, Camila, and newborn Daniel. A family he had destroyed out of pride and prejudice disguised as ambition. The painful truth crystallized. While he had built an empire based on exploitation and discrimination, Camila had built a legacy based on justice and social transformation. The contrast could not have been more brutal or more deserved. 10 years of meticulous planning had taught him a lesson that would echo forever. Underestimating an intelligent and determined black woman is not just stupidity, it is guaranteeing your own destruction. The best revenge, he discovered too late, is not to repay the damage suffered. It is to achieve such absolute success that any attempt to diminish it becomes irrelevant. If this story of justice and transformation touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because in a world where there are still many Richards out there, we need to celebrate every Camila who has the courage to prove that true greatness knows no color, social class, or limitations imposed by those who fear the power of true justice.